Hi, I'm Kim Santini. This is SOJOURNaling, my art journaling series that is focused on sitting inside who we are as individuals and exploring what it means to be human. In today's session, we're going to examine being rooted in shadow but reaching for the stars. So grab your book, come on into the studio, and spend some time journaling with me.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the materials that I'm going to be using today. And I want to remind you that even though I'm using specific products, you can always make substitutions and adapt the approach to match whatever you happen to have on hand, okay? So the biggest concept or the most important thing I want you to keep in mind with this particular lesson is that we're going to want to have two different values. We're going to be creating two different layers in our book. We're going to be making a layer of dark marks, and we're going to be making a layer of lighter marks. So gather a handful of different sorts of darker mark making tools. So what I have here is a transparent blue called Smalt Hue. This is an acrylic paint. I have a bottle of acrylic ink, and this is blue marine ink. This is really opaque. This one is transparent, so that's a great thing. I have a piece of water-soluble graphite. This is very intensely pigmented. It is black. It's going to make some really cool marks. And I have an extra large piece of charcoal. And this is kind of an intermediate blue. It's going to add a nice bit of hue to things. So I have chosen that. So these are going to be the tools that I'm going to use for my layer of dark marks. My layer of light marks, I'm going to use zinc white for. I really like zinc white because, as you can see here, this is a stroke of the paint on the label. It's very transparent and opaque, and that's exactly what I want. I want my layer of paint to be really see-through when it's dry. A couple of other things I'm going to use. This is a very transparent and brightly colored yellow paint. I have a pencil. I have a dip pen to use with the ink. I have a paintbrush here. You may want to use a brayer if you wish. I also like to use sorts of spatula type things from the home improvement store, as well as a room key from a hotel. These are great for spreading paint around. I'm also going to be using a roll of painter's tape. This is totally optional. And then because some of these products are really messy, you may want to have some baby wipes around. These are perfect for cleaning the product right off your hands as you're working. And the other thing, because some of these products may be toxic or harmful if they get absorbed into our skin, you may want to consider either wearing a glove to protect yourself or using a barrier cream. So to get started, you want to choose a page in your book. And again, a reminder that you do not have to work sequentially in your book from front to back. You can completely choose the sequence of which you wish to tackle or make marks in your book. And what I'm going to do is I'm taking this painter's tape and I'm going to make a frame or mask off a frame around the perimeter of my page here. What this is going to do is it's going to give me a nice clean interior edge, and that contrast between the crisp edge and the marks that I'm going to make for the journaling page along with this brown of the craft paper, I think is going to be really interesting. I'm working in my Dina Wakley Ranger mixed media book. For those of you who are curious, I love this journal. I've actually been obsessed with it for a couple of years now. This is my second one that I've filled. So I don't want to press the tape down too hard because I do want to be able to remove it with minimal damage on the page. But I want to make sure that my edges here around the inner perimeter are attached to the page. So there you have it. I have my mask already made, and I'm ready to get going. So the thing that is going to inspire, or the thing that has inspired this page, is a little card that I got in a recent online order. And the card has a little mantra on it. It says, "I stand with feet rooted in shadow. I reach upwards to the stars." And I found that to be such a beautiful thought, such a beautiful intention, particularly based on some of the struggles that I have had internally with things that are happening in the world. Sometimes we feel like, or sometimes I feel like I am buried in shadow, and I have to remind myself to look up, or look for the stars, look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers used to always say. So this particular message really resonated with me, so much so that I wanted to make a journaling page out of it. So, standing rooted in shadow. That's where these dark marks are going to come in. And these tools that are materials that we grabbed to create some dark marks for us, we're going to use those now. And we're going to use them inside this space here. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to settle myself into the idea of the shadows and the things that feel like they're dragging me down, or the weight that I'm carrying. And I'm going to visualize those, and I'm going to make some marks that sort of represent those things. So I'm just going to take my tool, and I'm going to start to make some marks. And the idea isn't to draw or represent anything literal. It's just, the intention is just to get some marks down there that represent some of the tension or the darkness, or the more uncomfortable feelings that some of these things make us feel. And that chalk has really left a good residue on my fingers. So I'm going to wipe them off. And I'm just going to continue. Now, one thing that you could do is you could put on music that reflects what you're feeling, and you could make lines that go along with that. You could also just lose yourself in sort of a visualization exercise where you think about how you felt. You go back in time and you think about how you felt at the onset of a particular situation or scenario. One of the beautiful things about having this border here is that I can make my marks freely, and I don't have to feel like I'm restrained or trying to commit anything, Also, feel free to attack your page. You can change your grip on your tool. You can make dark marks. You can scribble so hard that you break your tool. And really what we want to do is get a good amount of material or product down here on that page. I'm going to grab a baby wipe and wipe my hand off here, because I do not want to be leaving fingerprints everywhere. Okay. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this ink, and I'm just going to use, typically ink is used with a dip pen, but I'm just going to utilize my dropper here. And sort of scribble. So, depending on the tools that you have used or chosen to use, those will dictate the kind of marks that you're able to make. And there's really no set amount of time for you to be making these, filling this page up. Take as much time as you feel like you need. To get that expression out. Another way that you could tackle this layer is to print out some newspaper headlines, do some collage work with those. You could start with some spill writing, which is a practice that we have used in other lessons where you just sit and do a stream of consciousness, sort of brain dump of all the things that are weighing you down. Don't be afraid to take this exercise and turn it into your own, okay? That's what's most important here. I never really want students to copy exactly what I'm doing on my pages. I just want you to feel inspired and moved to create something that represents what you're feeling and the tools that you have on hand. So this ink, I can see it's kind of puddling and pooling in different places, and I'm gonna take this card here and I'm gonna scrape and pull. That really changes sort of the quality of the marks quite a bit, doesn't it? I've got a good amount of ink up here on the top of my card. Okay. So I'm going to let this dry for a little bit, and then we will come back for our next layer of marks. But I'm really intrigued or particularly pleased with sort of the density of how some of these darks kind of bleed into each other. And there's also different qualities to the edge work and the transparency of them that I find intriguing to look at. And it also symbolically represents the complexities of some of the situations or scenarios that are sitting in my own shadows or the shadows that I am rooted in. Okay, so the next stage is that we're going to put a pretty good sized or good thickness layer of paint down over top of these marks. Now, in my instance or case, some of these marks I've used, the water soluble black ink stick and the acrylic, or not the acrylic, the dark blue charcoal stick. Those are not fixed, meaning that they're not sealed behind anything. They're not dry. They may get picked up in my in the paint that I put down next, and that's okay. I'm not concerned about that at all. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my zinc white, and I'm going to use this card, and I'm just going to scoop out a generous amount of paint here. And I'm going to put it down on the page. And I'm also going to put a tiny smidge of this smalt blue right there as well. And I'm going to use the card and I'm going to mix them together right here on the page. So I'm getting kind of this cool combo or modeling that happens between the two different colors. Now I want to put some more white paint on this page, but I'm also going to sort of wipe my card off so that I don't dirty up what's already on the or what's already in my jar. And I'm gonna run some paint across here, and I'm gonna run some more across here. Okay. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my bigger spatula, and I'm gonna see what I can do to drag this down the page. And I can tell that I don't have enough paint here. And I'm gonna drag. So really what I wanna do is I wanna cover this up as best as I can. And I'm not a fan of that dark line that it's scratched into it. So I'm just gonna bring some more product in. Clean up around the perimeter here. Now right now, it appears as though this paint is not transparent, but I can assure you that it will dry pretty, it will dry more thinly, or not thinly. It will, as it dries, it will clear up a little bit and we'll be able to see some of the marks underneath. But what I want to do next is, while the paint is still wet, I'm going to put some of this barrier cream on my hands. Oh, and I should remove my jewelry too. Okay. Because what I want to do next is I am going to take my non-dominant hand and I'm going to position it on the page as though I am reaching for the stars. So I think I'm going to spread my fingers a little wide. I'm going to drop my elbow so it's in, so that from my elbow to my wrist to my knuckles is all one straight line. And I'm going to slowly lower my hand into the wet paint. Now I'm taking the back end of this paintbrush and I'm going to trace the perimeter of my hand with the sharp edge or the back side of my paintbrush. And I'm taking my tracing lines all the way to the edge of the blue paint. Now when I go to, oh, I just put my other hand in the leftover paint. When I go to lift this up, you might need to use your other hand to sort of remove. And now you see the need for a baby wipe. Although if you plan ahead and you have another surface, maybe another journal book open, you could take this handprint and actually, you know what? I'll do it right here. It may not show up because it's mostly white on white, but that's kind of cool. You can make use of the paint that you have on your fingers here. So let me get this cleaned off. Now what we have here is this luscious sort of space that's created, or luscious sort of surface here that's created. And now we can go in with our paintbrush and we can sort of soften, use our brush to soften, lift. We could draw, we could write. I'm picking the paint up with the brush and then I'm just wiping it off inside this baby wipe. I could use water, but I'm afraid that if I were to come in here with water, that it just really would make the paint super soupy, and I don't necessarily want to do that. I kind of messed up this edge, so I'm going to redraw it. You could also go in and you could use your paintbrush to scratch out more areas. I really like this super thick bit that's right here around the wrist line. And if I scratch it out, I can go in and pull even more out. Now, if you have tools like paint scrapers or paint pushers, if you happen to have those, they would be great to use right now because they're fabulous for lifting product up off of a page. And don't be afraid to move things around after you've scraped. Your paint is ultimately going to get dry or too dry to scrape. So you have a limited amount of time to work into the layer this way. Okay. Now I'm going to take my brayer and I'm going to very gently brayer to further texturize the page. Now the brayer does pick up a good amount of paint, so I'm going to use it over here. Just sort of get that paint, the excess paint off of it. I don't know what my plans will be for this other page or the facing page. But this is going to create a nice sort of background for me to do something over top of down the road. All right, so now my page is dry and I'm going to very slowly and carefully peel my painter's tape off of the page. And you can see that there's a really, really beautiful line here, or frame left. Paint did a nice job. It's not perfect, but it's perfect enough. Now when the paper starts to lift like this, I'll go from the other direction. Sometimes removing the paper from an opposite direction will keep or limit that tear from really spreading or expanding. Let's do this one. There's a little bit of a lift there, but that's okay. All right, so there we go. So now we have this beautiful hand that's reaching for the stars. And we have this perimeter here. I want to point out a couple of things. So the scale of this page is such that my hand sort of fit inside this perimeter. But if your page is such where your hand extended beyond or into the margins, you can always go back in with your ink and a paintbrush and sort of complete those shapes if that's important to you. So think about that. It also could be particularly satisfying if your hand did actually expand out beyond the dark or the shadow space, just from a symbolic standpoint, because of this, it speaks to the power of our actions. But really what I want to do right now is I'm just going to put some stars in to the piece, and I'm going to use this yellow paint, and I'm just going to finger paint. And actually I should probably put a little bit more barrier cream on. Because I'm finger painting, I'm just going to put it over top of my finger here. Okay. And I'm just going to put a little dab. And you can put stars wherever you wish. Try to space them. You know, try to avoid them being in any particular recognizable pattern. Take advantage, you know, make them in different sizes even. You can vary that by the amount of paint that you put on your finger. Maybe there's one right there. Let's make this one bigger. Put one down there. So you want variety and interest. You don't want them to all be the exact same, okay? Because that's what makes things, differences are what makes things interesting. Okay? And then if you are so inclined, you can return to the text and you can add that text somewhere along the perimeter. You can ink it in. Think about the color that you would like to do it in. I could even just collage this card right into my book if I wished to. Or I could put it over here. Or I could put this over here and take the text from this side over to here. So you can see that I have added some text to the bottom, and I did that with, let me make sure the lid's on, with my ink and a quill pen or a dip pen, and I just added that ink in. Now, it did get blurry in a couple of places, but that's okay. I feel like that is also sort of indicative of the nature of the whole page and the idea of, you know, continuing onwards despite difficult beginning. And actually, as I was working on this and finishing this up, and I had this card sitting here, and I thought, well, okay, so this is already down here. If I were to glue the card over here, I am the seer of all that approaches. That got me thinking of doing another hand-based page from here. So stay tuned for that element or bit to show up next. This is a perfect example of me working on the fly. Originally, I had only intended for the one page to be part of this lesson, but now it's become apparent that this is actually a spread and not a singular page. So I've masked the perimeter off to match the facing page, and you can see that I'm tracing my hand right now. And I'm going to go in with the smalt blue acrylic paint, and I'm going to negative space paint my hand so that this particular side has a white hand on a dark ground. A little bit different than the facing page, and again, differences are what makes things interesting. So in keeping with the quote or the card that addresses being a seer of all things, I'm going to turn this hand into a Hamsa hand, which represents the third eye. So once I get this negative space painted in, I'm going to reach for that acrylic ink, the same color that I used on the other page. I'm going to outline my hand. I'm using a paintbrush, and I noticed pretty quickly that the page is a lot more porous than I would like. So I'm not going to be able to get a super crisp line with a lot of details. I would have really loved to have been able to get that, but I'm not going to fight with my tools. I'm just going to go with the organic nature of the page. So I'm going to outline this hand, and I am going to compromise and put a very sort of generic or loosely detailed Hamsa hand into this design. So I am freehanding it all, but if you wanted to draw it in prior to inking, just grab a mechanical pencil or a hard pencil, and you can create some pencil plans so that your ink goes in almost seamlessly. While you're doing this, pay attention to the quality of line. You know, thick lines versus thin lines really can control the weight of the design as well as direct the viewer's eye. So have some fun with this. And don't be afraid to also bring in some personal symbolism. I happen to love dots, and I love organic, viney sorts of shapes. And I also believe the rose to be a personal symbol of my own. So those are the sorts of design elements that I've brought into my hand here. And now that I've done this page actually, and I'm looking at it, I'm thinking that a great exercise would be to do another version of this particular prompt, but combining the Hamsa design with the carved in drawings or the scored line work from the previous hand, sort of combining them into the same sort of page. So you could play with that or pursue that idea if you think it sounds intriguing to you. Really having fun with this, just letting go and losing myself in the beauty of the concept, you know, of seeing all things and recognizing where one is rooted, but reaching for a better place. I'm putting a perimeter of ink or a border of ink around this piece before I peel the tape off, and I'll be good to go. So I feel like this page is a perfect example of listening to what your journaling practice is asking you to do and responding. Originally, I had thought I was creating one page about being rooted in shadows and reaching for the stars. And along the way, I found that there was more to the story. So, as always, I want to remind you that these prompts, these lessons, are really just starting points. And the goal is not for you to create or replicate the kind of pages that I am making, but to sit into or settle into the lesson, the prompt that's provided, and respond to it in your own unique personal way and turn it into an experience that really serves to express what you are feeling and where you are at that moment. Thank you so much for journaling with me, and I can't wait to bring you the next lesson. But meanwhile, if you are so inclined to share your pages on social media, do so with the SOJOURNaling hashtag, and I will have the opportunity to see what you're creating. Thank you again. I wish you all the best, and we will be back together journaling soon.